We're counting down 25 forgotten Moonshiner meals that Appalachian families cooked deep in the mountains. Dishes born in hidden hollows, where corn liquor stills bubbled and the revenuers were always one ridge away. These were the foods of people who lived off the land, stretched a single hog clear through winter, and turned foraged greens and cheap cornmeal into supper for a house full of children. From game shot at first light to sweets pulled straight off wild trees, each entry carries the smell of wood smoke and the grit of survival. Expect strange cuts, forgotten skills, and flavors most Americans have never tasted. Which mountain dish tops our list? Let's begin the countdown with number 25. Number 25. Ash cakes were the oldest bread the mountains knew, cooked without a stove, a pan, or even a fire anyone could see. A moonshiner's wife would mix cornmeal, salt, and a little water into a stiff dough, wrap it in cabbage or hickory leaves, and bury it in the hot ashes at the edge of the hearth. No smoke, no clatter, nothing to draw a revenuer's eye up the hollow. In an hour, she'd rake out a hard, smoky little loaf, brush off the ash, and split it steaming. Children ate it with a smear of hog lard and a pinch of salt, the crust tasting faintly of the woods themselves. Federal Writers' Project interviews from the 1930s recorded ash cake as the poorest family's daily bread. When wood stoves reached every cabin, the ashes went cold, and the recipe with them. Number 24. Cracklin' cornbread turned the leftovers of hog-killing day into the richest bread on the mountain. After a family rendered lard in a great iron kettle, they were left with cracklins, crisp little bits of fried pork skin and fat too good to waste, stirred into a cornmeal batter and baked in a screaming hot skillet slicked with grease. They made a bread studded with salty, crunchy pockets of pork. A pone cost almost nothing, since cornmeal ran a few cents a pound, and the cracklins were free. Fathers crumbled it into a glass of buttermilk for supper. Children fought over the crusty edges nearest the pan. In moonshine country, corn was both bread and business, and nothing from the hog was ever thrown out. Store-bought bread and trimmed supermarket pork slowly killed the tradition, and cracklin' cornbread faded to a Sunday memory. Number 23. Leather breeches were green beans preserved the old way, long before anyone owned a freezer. In late summer, families threaded fresh beans onto long strings with a needle and hung them from the rafters to dry, curling into brown, leathery loops that gave the dish its name. Through the dead of winter, a handful were soaked overnight, then simmered for hours with a chunk of fatback until they turned tender and smoky. The flavor was deeper and earthier than any fresh bean, concentrated by months of drying. A single summer's garden could feed a family until spring. Foxfire interviews recall whole porches curtained with drying beans in September. When home canning and cheap tinned vegetables took over, the strings came down for good, and few families now remember the patience that leather breeches once demanded. Number 22. Poke salad was the first green of spring, and one of the most dangerous meals in these mountains. Pokeweed grew wild along fence rows and old home sites, but the mature plant is poisonous, so mothers gathered only the youngest shoots. The trick was in the cooking, boiling the leaves through 2 or 3 changes of water to draw out the toxins, then frying them in bacon grease, sometimes scrambled with an egg. Done right, it tasted rich and grassy, a tonic after a winter of dried beans and cornbread. Poke cost nothing but the walk to find it, arriving just when the smokehouse ran empty. Children learned early which plant to pick and how many times to pour off the water. As grocery greens grew cheap and the knowledge grew rare, poke salad became a dish people feared more than craved. Number 21. Killed lettuce was springtime on a plate, gone in the time it took to heat a skillet. Mountain families cut the first tender leaf lettuce and green onions from the garden, tore them into a bowl, then poured over a spoonful of bacon grease, heated until it smoked. The hot fat wilted, or killed, the leaves instantly, softening them and coating everything in salty, smoky richness, finished with a splash of vinegar. It was a supper of pure freshness after months of preserved food, and it cost only what the garden gave. Grandmothers timed the grease by the wisp of blue smoke rising off the pan. Children remembered the sizzle and the sharp sting of vinegar in the air. Bottled dressings and year-round salad greens made killed lettuce seem primitive, and the dish quietly slipped off the mountain table. Number 20. Fried squirrel and gravy put meat on the table when there was no money for the butcher. A boy with a single-shot .22 caliber could bring home supper from the woods behind the still, and squirrel was the most common prize of all. The pieces were rolled in seasoned flour and fried crisp in lard. Then the drippings became a milk gravy poured thick over biscuits. The meat was dark and nutty, richer than chicken, and a couple of squirrels could feed a whole family. Hunting fed households that couldn't risk being seen buying much in town. Oral histories from the Blue Ridge recall Sunday breakfasts of squirrel gravy after a dawn hunt, as supermarkets made cheap chicken universal, and hunting turned from necessity to sport. Fried squirrel vanished from all but the oldest kitchens, remembered now with equal parts fondness and disbelief. Number 19. Souse meat made a feast out of the parts of the hog most people would rather forget. After hog killing, the head, feet, and trimmings were simmered for hours until the meat fell away and the broth turned thick with natural gelatin. The meat was chopped, seasoned hard with sage, black pepper, and vinegar, then packed into a bowl and left to set into a firm, sliceable loaf. Sliced cold for breakfast or laid on cornbread, souse was tangy, dense, and deeply porky. On a moonshiner's homestead, wasting a single scrap of a hog was unthinkable, so every ounce found a purpose. Children eyed the jellied slices with suspicion. Grandfathers ate them with relish and mustard. As independent hog killing died out and packaged lunch meat filled the store cooler, souse retreated to a handful of country markets and long memories. Number 18. Liver mush was the working man's breakfast across the southern mountains, a thrifty loaf built from pork liver and cornmeal. Butchers and farm families ground boiled liver with the broth, thickened it with cornmeal and sage until it set firm, then sliced it and fried it crisp in a hot skillet. The outside turned dark and crunchy, while the inside stayed soft, savory, and faintly sweet. Served beside eggs or slapped between two biscuits, it fueled a man through a long day in the fields or at the still. A pound cost pennies, since liver was the cheapest cut a family owned. Mothers pressed it into loaf pans and kept it in the spring house for the week. As tastes turned away from organ meat and factory sausage grew cheaper, liver mush faded to a regional curiosity, still whispered about in the Carolina foothills. Number 17. Sawmill gravy stretched a spoonful of grease and a handful of flour into breakfast for a crowd. When the meat ran thin, a mountain cook browned flour in the fat left from frying fatback, whisked in milk or even water, and seasoned it hard with black pepper until it thickened into a creamy, peppery gravy. Ladled over split biscuits or cornbread, it turned near nothing into a filling meal. The name came from the logging camps, where it was said the gravy was thick enough to grease a saw blade. It cost almost nothing and appeared on tables most mornings, meat or no meat. Children sopped their plates clean with the last biscuit half. As bacon and sausage grew affordable for everyone, plain sawmill gravy came to seem like a poverty dish, and the leaner recipes were quietly forgotten. Number 16. Fried cushaw squash made a sweet golden supper out of a homely mountain vegetable few Americans have ever seen. The cushaw is a big crook-necked squash with pale striped skin, easy to grow and easy to keep through winter in a cool cellar. Families peeled and sliced the orange flesh, then fried it slow in butter or lard with a scatter of sorghum or sugar until the edges caramelized and turned candy sweet. It tasted somewhere between pumpkin and sweet potato, comforting on a cold night. A single cushaw could weigh 20 pounds and feed a family for days. Gardens along the hollows always kept a few vines going for winter eating. As stores stocked year-round produce and the old heirloom seeds grew scarce, the cushaw nearly disappeared, and the fried squash suppers of the mountains went with it. Number 15. Chow. Chow was the jar of summer that brightened a long mountain winter. At harvest, families chopped the last green tomatoes, cabbage, peppers, and onions before frost took them, then cooked the lot down with vinegar, sugar, and spices, and sealed it in jars. Tangy, sweet, and sharp, a spoonful of chow. Chow lifted a plain bowl of soup beans or a slab of cornbread into something worth savoring. Every family guarded its own recipe, and no two jars tasted alike. It cost only the garden's leftovers and a cook's long afternoon at the stove. Children carried jars to the cellar to line the shelves for the cold months. Store relishes, uniform and cheap, slowly replaced the homemade jars, and the ritual of putting up chow faded from all but the most stubborn mountain kitchens. Number 14. Ramps and fried taters announced spring across the high mountains with a smell no one ever forgot. Ramps are wild leeks that push up through the leaves in April, pungent as garlic and onion combined, gathered by the sackful from shady coves. Families chopped them into a skillet of potatoes, frying in bacon grease, the whole cabin filling with a smell so strong that school children who ate them were said to clear a room. But after a winter of dried and salted food, that sharp green bite was pure medicine. Ramps cost nothing but a hike up the ridge. Diggings turned into community gatherings, whole families out with sacks and knives. As the mountains emptied and the young left for the mills and cities, the ramp patches went unvisited, and a spring feast that once perfumed every hollow grew rare. Number 13. Fried cornmeal mush was breakfast, dessert, and a lesson in wasting nothing, all from a pot of leftover porridge. A cook boiled cornmeal with water and salt into a thick mush, ate some hot with butter and sorghum, then poured the rest into a pan to set overnight. By morning it had firmed enough to slice, and each slab was fried crisp and golden in a greased skillet. The outside crackled while the inside stayed soft and creamy, and drizzled with sorghum, it made a supper as good as any sweet. Cornmeal was the cheapest food in the hollow, so moosh appeared on the table in some form nearly every day. Children knew the fried slices meant a treat. When boxed cereal arrived on store shelves, the humble mush pot went cold, and few families now bother to fry the leftovers. Number 12. Possum and sweet potatoes was a supper born of hard necessity, one that separated the old mountain ways from everything that came after. When the smokehouse ran empty, the woods still gave, and a possum treed by a dog on a cold night meant meat for the family. It was cleaned, parboiled to render the heavy fat, then roasted in the pan ringed with sweet potatoes that soaked up the drippings and turned soft and sweet. The meat was rich and greasy, an acquired taste even then. But in the leanest winters of the Depression, it kept families fed when nothing else would. Oral histories tell of hunts that meant the difference between supper and an empty table. As times improved and store meat grew cheap, possum slid from necessity to punchline, and the dish quietly disappeared. Number 11. Lye hominy was corn transformed by patience and wood ash into something entirely new. Dried field corn was soaked and boiled with lye leached from hardwood ashes until the tough hulls loosened and slipped away, leaving swollen, tender kernels. Rinsed again and again to wash the lye clean, the hominy was then simmered with fatback or fried in grease for a chewy, nutty side dish. The process took a full day and real skill, since too much lye ruined the batch. But it stretched a bushel of hard corn into weeks of eating, and in corn country that mattered more than anything. Grandmothers judged the ashes by feel and the corn by eye. When canned hominy appeared on store shelves for a dime, the long ash and lye ritual vanished almost overnight, taking generations of know-how with it. Number 10. Persimmon. Pudding captured the taste of the first autumn frost in a dense, dark, spiced dessert. Wild persimmons cling to the trees until the cold turns them from bitterly astringent to honey-sweet, and mountain children gathered them by the bucket once they'd softened and fallen. The pulp was strained and stirred into a batter of cornmeal or flour, sorghum, and spices, then baked slow until it set into something between a cake and a pudding, deep brown and jammy. It cost nothing but the walk to the tree and the patience to wait for the frost. Families served it at gatherings, each cook prized for her pudding. The knowledge of which trees bore the sweetest fruit passed quietly between neighbors. As wild foraging faded and store-bought desserts took over, persimmon pudding became one of the mountain's best-kept and most forgotten secrets. Number 9. Apple butter simmered all day in a copper kettle and turned a mountain of apples into a jar of dark, spiced sweetness. In the fall, families and neighbors gathered around an open fire, taking turns stirring the bubbling apples with a long wooden paddle so they wouldn't scorch, adding sorghum and cinnamon as the pulp cooked down for hours into a thick, glossy spread. The whole hollow smelled of apples and wood smoke. Spread on a biscuit through the winter, it carried the taste of autumn into the coldest months. A single kettle put up enough jars to last a family until spring. Apple butter stirrings were social events, full of talk and laughter around the fire. Mass-produced jars on the grocery shelf ended the all-day gatherings, and the copper kettles were left to hang, dark and unused, in barns across the mountains. Number 8. Sorghum molasses was the mountain's own sweetness, wrung from cane in a ritual that marked the close of every year. Families grew sorghum cane, then pressed the stalks through a mule-drawn mill to squeeze out the green juice, which was boiled down for hours in long pans until it thickened into dark, ropey syrup. It sweetened everything a moonshine family owned: biscuits, cornbread, mush, and pudding. Because store sugar cost money the mountains rarely had. A good sorghum making was a community affair, neighbors trading labor for a share of the syrup. Children sopped the fresh, warm molasses with bread torn straight from the loaf. The flavor was deeper and more mineral than sugar, unmistakably Appalachian. As cheap, refined sugar flooded the stores, the cane mills fell silent, and true mountain sorghum became a rare and treasured thing. Number 7. Chicken and slick dumplings was the Sunday dinner that meant a family was doing well enough to spare a hen. An old laying hen past her prime was stewed for hours until the meat fell from the bone and the broth turned rich and golden. Then came the dumplings, not the fluffy dropped kind, but slicks, rolled thin from flour dough, cut into flat strips and dropped into the simmering pot to cook soft and slippery. The dish stretched one tough bird into a meal for a full table. Sacrificing a hen meant no eggs, so it was reserved for special days and honored guests. Mothers rolled the dough on a floured board while children waited by the stove. As grocery store chickens made poultry and everyday food, the ceremony drained out of the dish, and hand-rolled slick dumplings grew scarce. Number 6. Half-moon fried apple pies were the sweet a mountain cook could carry in an apron pocket, made from dried apples and a little dough. Apples were peeled and sliced thin in the fall, dried on screens in the sun, then stored away for winter. To make the pies, the dried fruit was stewed soft with sorghum and spices, spooned onto a round of dough, folded into a half-moon, crimped, and fried crisp in a skillet of hot lard. The crust blistered golden, while the filling turned thick and intensely apply. They cost almost nothing and traveled well, tucked into a lunch pail or handed to a child heading out to play. The smell of frying pies filled the cabin on cold afternoons. Frozen and store-bought pies eventually made the dried apple ritual seem like too much trouble, and the little fried pies slowly disappeared. Number 5. Cat head. Biscuits were the heart of every mountain breakfast, big as a cat's head and just as homely. A cook cut lard into soft flour, splashed in buttermilk, and worked the dough by feel, never a measuring cup in sight, then pinched off rough, oversized rounds and crowded them into a black skillet to bake tall and tender. Split open and filled with sausage gravy, sorghum, or apple butter, a cathead biscuit could carry a family through a morning of hard work. Flour and lard were among the few staples worth buying in town, and biscuits appeared at nearly every meal. Grandmothers were judged by the lightness of their biscuits, a skill measured only in the hands. As canned biscuits and store bread crept into mountain kitchens, the daily ritual of hand-mixed dough faded, and the true cathead grew rare. Number 4. Blackberry cobbler turned a summer of scratched arms and stained fingers into the sweetest reward the mountains offered. Wild blackberries grew thick along fence lines in old fields, free for anyone willing to brave the briars and the snakes, and children spent July days filling buckets until their hands were purple. The berries were baked under a simple crust of flour, sorghum, and lard, the juice bubbling up dark and sweet through the golden top. A cobbler cost nothing but the picking and a cup of flour. Served warm with fresh cream from the spring house, it was the taste of summer itself. Families competed over the best berry patches, their locations guarded like family secrets. As stores began selling fruit and pastries year-round, the long, hot picking days faded, and homemade blackberry cobbler slipped from a weekly joy to an occasional treat. Number 3. Grits and red-eye. Gravy was the breakfast that started a moonshiner's day before the sun cleared the ridge. A slice of salty country ham was fried hard in a cast-iron skillet, and once the meat came out, a splash of strong black coffee was poured into the drippings, lifting the browned bits into a thin, sharp, reddish gravy. Poured over a mound of stone-ground grits, it was salty, bitter, and bracing, a jolt to carry a man up the mountain to tend the still. The grits were ground from the family's own corn, the ham cured in the smokehouse, the coffee, the one luxury worth buying. Fathers ate it standing before dawn. The smell of ham and coffee meant work was near. As instant grits and packaged breakfasts took over, the ritual of red-eye gravy faded, surviving now mostly in memory in roadside diners. Number 2. Soup, beans, and cornbread was the meal that held the mountains together, the supper that appeared on more tables, more nights than any other. A pot of dried pinto beans was set to simmer at dawn, with a piece of fatback or a ham hock, cooking low all day until the beans turned soft and the broth thickened into something rich and smoky. Ladled into a bowl and eaten with a wedge of hot cornbread crumbled right in, topped with raw onion and chow-chow, it fed a family for pennies. Beans and cornmeal were the two things a mountain household could always keep on hand, and together they made a complete, filling meal. Children grew up on it. Grown men swore by it. Though it survives in mountain homes still, the daily bean pot that once defined Appalachia has largely gone quiet, replaced by faster, costlier food. Number 1. Apple stack cake crowned every celebration in moonshine country. The towering dessert that meant a wedding, a homecoming, or a holiday worth remembering. Because sugar and store cake were luxuries, families built this cake from what the mountains gave. Thin, cookie-like layers of sorghum-sweetened dough, baked one at a time in a skillet, then stacked 5 or 6 or even a dozen high with spiced dried apple filling spread between each layer. Made a day ahead so the fruit could soak into the cake, it grew moist and dense, sliced into dark, striped wedges. In the old custom, guests each brought a layer to a wedding, and the bride's popularity was measured by how tall her cake rose. Its ties to mountain gatherings, often the very gatherings where the corn liquor flowed, made it legendary. As bakery cakes took over, the stack cake became the rarest treasure of Appalachian cooking. Across all 25 dishes, from the buried ash cakes that opened our list to the towering apple stack cake at the very top, these forgotten Moonshiner meals tell a powerful story of survival, self-reliance, and a people who fed themselves off the land when the world offered them almost nothing. Some, like possum and lie hominy, stand as stark reminders of just how hard those mountain winters could be, while others, like sorghum molasses and blackberry cobbler, show how sweetness could still be coaxed from a life of scarcity. The common thread is corn, lard, and a refusal to waste a single scrap. The same ingenuity that turned a corn crop into liquor also turned it into bread, gravy, and hominy. These weren't just recipes. They were the taste of a hidden Appalachia that fed its families deep in the hollows, one skillet and one secret at a time.